series is from chapter number 4, verse number 29. However, you'll need 3 other verses for tonight, inshallah. So the first one will be Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 268. Then Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 276. And then Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 245. Absolutely. So, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 268. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 276. And then Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 245. So these are the verses that we will need for tonight's discussion, inshaAllah. For the love of our Holy Prophet, let us have a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تأكلوا أموالكم بينكم بالباطل إلا أن تكون تجارة عن تراض منكم ولا تقتلوا أنفسكم إن الله كان بكم رحيما. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our continuing series looking at Islamic business laws and Islamic business ethics. This of course will be our last discussion prior to Shahr Ramadan. And depending on how we feel, if we want to continue the series, then we can have another session after the holy month. I wanted to have one more session on the issue of khums, which I think is very important for us to be able to know our duties and responsibilities on. So inshallah, after Shahr Ramadan, we will conclude the series with one more session, and that will be particular to the mas'ala of khums. So far, we have looked at the following pertinent points. Number 1, depending on where your taqleed lies, for you to learn your business laws are either mustahab or wajib, depending on whether you will require them on a daily basis or whether it is feared that out of ignorance one may fall short of their duties and commit a sin. Number 2, there are 3 types of rulings. Number 1, where Allah does not involve himself and allows you and I to be able to make our own contracts as we please. That is based on the ayah that we have just read, where it is for us to have a contract based on taradi, based on our own satisfaction that we have made a contract between ourselves. The second type of Islamic ruling would be where the marja provides us with a principle. We have to understand how the principle works, and then whenever we have a question, we will go back to that particular principle. And the third type of Islamic ruling would be the one where there is an evidence from Quran, from Sunnah, from logic, from the practices of society, that this is the way the contract should be. So we span ourselves across these 3 different rulings. So far we have looked at 6 different principles, 5 in a previous session, and then we added a 6th principle last week, and we started to look at the issue of gharar, which we will come to just remind ourselves briefly on in a minute. Who can remind me of the 6 Islamic principles that we have covered and spoken about in our series so far? It allows us to be able to appreciate the middle of the 3 rulings. Allah gives us freedom to act in 1, so long as there is taradi baynana, we are happy with our own deals. The 2nd is where there are principles. The 3rd is where there is an actual fatwa and you must follow it to the letter because there is an evidence from the divine legislator to say so. We have looked at 6 principles. Can you remind us of some of these principles? Number 1. الناس مسلطون على أموالهم. People have a right over their own wealth to be able to do as they please. Brilliant. Number 1. Another?
Free to make a contract.
You are free to make a contract? Brilliant. We said that you are free to make a contract is in, there are types of Islamic laws that allow you to have absolute freedom. But this isn't one of the 6 fiqhi principles. 6 fiqhi principles, amongst the 6 fiqhi principles? Ahsan. Everything is halal until proven otherwise, until you know otherwise. You have an evidence to say otherwise. Brilliant. 2.
Not sell something that's not yours.
Brilliant. You cannot sell something that is not yours. It has to be tangible, it has to belong to you for you to be able to sell it. And this is something that we focused on last week, isn't it? Right? 4. So shurut al-i'wadain were the principles, 4 principles that we spoke about last week about when you want to exchange items, what are the principles of those? That's not one of the principles of fiqh. So there was la dharar wa la dhirar, no harm, no harming. No gharar, which was, how did we define gharar? Undue risk. And the 6th principle? Everything that is in accordance with Quran and Sunnah, it is halal. And of course, if you try to make a contract in which there is a condition which is against Quran and Sunnah, it would be haram. 6 principles that we can always go back to in whatever contract we make. It could be that I'm getting married and we're making our contract for our aqdun nikah. It could be that I'm an employer or an employee. It could be that I'm making a transaction on behalf of the mosque. These are 6 principles that I can go back to. So last week we defined gharar. We said it was undue risk. And then we went a little bit more in detail as to how we could define that. For example, is it risky if you are ignorant of the business deal going through? No, it's not. Because many of us invest in things that we don't have full knowledge on. So, we stated last week that as an example, undue risk can be defined as without due diligence. When you haven't done your proper research or background, at this point, if I was to make a contract, make a deal, make an investment, in the eyes of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu, this contract is batil. It doesn't exist, it is invalidated. And so we can see the seriousness, the effect of gharar in our own transactions. Tonight, inshallah, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to look at both fiqh as well as ethics when it comes to some of our business laws. And we're going to look at 3 areas, inshallah. Number 1, the issue of interest, taking interest, or demanding interest, which will lead us on to the issue of loans and what rules apply upon us when we give a loan or when we take a loan. Could be between friends, family members. It could be for business investment. It could be with a bank. What are the rules that are upon us when either becoming a debtor or a creditor? And then thirdly, we will go into some points about profit sharing and business partnerships. And we will just look at some broad principles, we will look at some rulings, and we will also look at some ethical examples that are from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam in the way in which they dealt with each other as business partners. Of course, the idea here is only to skim the surface. You know by now that if you have a specific issue in your own life when contract making, then we would need to go back to one of these three different rulings. Either you are free to make your own ruling, make your own contract, or you have to go back to a principle, or you have to look to the fatwa of your marja. So the verses that I've asked you to look at are verses regarding the issue of riba. Now there are many verses in the Quran regarding riba. It is not my intention to go through all of them, because that would prolong our discussion in the area of how Allah speaks about riba in the Quran, as opposed to some of our fiqhi issues which we're trying to cover at the moment. As with everything in Islam, there are normally at least two definitions. There are how we define the term commonly amongst ourselves, and then there's the definition that is in fiqh. And sometimes these are two slightly different things, right? Just as a simple example, if I said, pray for me, it could be that you can pray for me in any way, in any time. But of course, if I was to use the word salah, it could be that I'm specifically talking about the act of salah, which is a fiqhi act. And so sometimes in Islam, there is a word that is defined historically. Sometimes it is defined in a fiqhi sense. Riba has these also same definitions. That sometimes you can define it in a way in which economists define it, which they try to go to the granularity of the issue. And then of course there is the Islamic definition of interest. So what I want to be able to do is to look at the fiqhi definition, but also the spirit, and see how the Quran defines this particular issue, and then look at some of the masail around this and some of the rulings that are upon us. So if you open your Qurans, we can start with Surah Al-Baqarah verse 268. Now the definition of riba in the context of its historical usage, how the Quran came to stop the practices of interest taking, has a slightly longer definition than a fiqhi definition. The fiqhi definition is a little bit narrower. The Quranic version is slightly longer. Have a look at this verse from the Quran. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم. Shaitan threatens you, or he promises you, or he bids you, depending on how you want to translate it. But in either way, what it means is Shaitan's goal is to put you into a situation. What is that situation? الشيطان يعدكم الفقر. Shaitan bids you towards poverty. ويأمركم بالفحشاء, and orders you towards immorality. Now think about this. If you're reading the Quran, a person may immediately ask the question, why would Shaitan bid me towards poverty? I mean, is a poor person more likely to do more sins than a rich person? Is that what's happening? No. So what do you think it means when Allah says here, Shaitan bids you towards poverty? What could it mean? What could it be alluding to here? scares you towards poverty. Absolutely. What else? In the context of Islamic laws.
Not poverty as in wealth, but poverty as described, but not particularly.
Do you mean like spiritual poverty?
Yes.
It's a very nice answer. So yes, as a secondary meaning, but the word faqr in Arabic language, in its primary meaning, literally means is in poverty from wealth. You're right. Another meaning is spiritual poverty. He bids you towards spiritual poverty. But in the context of our discussion of Islamic business laws, what it means is that the system that shaitan sets up, it will disempower people such that they will live in a state of desperation. That they will live in poverty that disempowers them from being able to focus on God or climb upwards in social mobility. Everything that shaitan does sets up people to be in a state of loss. What's very interesting is that in our ahadith, there are certain sins that Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam say brings about poverty in dunya. For example, zina, according to ahadith, brings about poverty. Now, why is another question. What's the relationship between that and poverty? Why not another outcome for the human being? It's very specific. Shaitan sets up apparatus that destroys people's wealth, destroys people's independence, destroys people's ability to have social mobility. This is the literal meaning of it. Now, having understood that, riba, interest, from the Quranic perspective and the way the Quran dealt with interest at the time of revelation, means the following. That interest is an increase. So when people loan money from one another, it is an increase that further disempowers a person. Another definition is that it's a type of interest, is a type of loan or taking from someone. Not only does it take advantage of the other person, it embeds people in their disadvantage. This is the meaning of riba from the Quranic perspective. And the idea is that shaitan wants to disempower people, wants to leave people wallowing in circumstances. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Maybe one of you could just do it now if you'd like to. Just Google, for example, BBC News, payday loan lenders. You've all heard of payday loan lenders, right? What's a payday loan lender? Quick loans. Yeah, basically it's a loan. It's a legal loan shark. Let's say you need some money desperately to get through to the end of the month. There are payday loan lenders, right? They're non-high street banks. They will charge above and beyond. How much do you think? There's a BBC article on this a few years back. Maybe you can search it for us. What does it say is the APR rate? Actually, BBC, a few years ago, you can Google this article, BBC found that in the UK, payday loan lenders can go up to 1,000% APR. Can you imagine? I mean, it's nonsensical. It's so exploitative, and until today we still don't have legislation around that. There's no cutoff point. The idea was then, as it is now, that if I lend you that money, I put you into such a cyclical problem that you cannot climb out of it. When the Quran came to be able to speak about riba, it was initially speaking at that level, which is why we've defined it as increase that furthers disempowerment, or increase that not only takes advantage, but it embeds people in their disadvantage. This is why the Quran says, الشيطان يعدكم الفقر. He bids you towards poverty. He's actually creating a system that would completely disempower people altogether. What else does he want to do? وَيَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. Now Allah responds in this ayah. Have a look at it. It's very interesting. وَاللَّهُ يَعِدُكُمْ مَغْفِرَ مِنْهُ. You know, maghfirah in the Arabic language, ghafara yaghfiru means to cover something, to protect something. If you had hurt yourself, you would put on something like a cast. You could also call it maghfirah in the Arabic language. It protects you. When Allah forgives you, it is a protection from your sin. That's how it's used. Shaitan bids you towards faqr. Wallahu ya'idakum maghfirah minhu. Allah bids you towards protection from him. It's amazing, isn't it? So most translators translate this as forgiveness from him. Yes, of course, everything that we fall to shaitan's bidding to, we need forgiveness. But in the context of faqr, it's the opposite. Allah builds a system that protects you minhu, from him, from shaitan. وَفَضْلًا, with bounty. Allah will give you protection with something extra as well, which we're going to come to in a second. Wallahu wasi'un alim. Allah cares. He's all-embracing, all-knowing. So His rules, Allah's rules, are all-embracing. Wasi'un. It's not for Muslims only. If only non-Muslims understood that they're being taken advantage of by the system of riba. So this is how, or one of the verses of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces the topic of riba. Now, what is very interesting is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks about the issue of loaning in completely different ways, which we'll come to in a minute, inshallah. If you open up your phones, I've sent through on the WhatsApp group some of the notes from tonight from the book of Ayatollah Sayyid Fadil Husseini Milani. May Allah protect him, one of the leading scholars here in the UK. And in the first page that I sent through to you, it talks about the issue of usury. Is it 218? The top of your screens? No. 212. Jazakumullah khair. Okay. So, prior to money being the source of exchange, how did people used to exchange things? Before someone invented money? Yeah, they bartered commodities. They bartered goods. So someone had, a kilo of barley. They would barter it for a kilo of sugar or whatever it might be of this nature. Or I have a certain skill set and you have a certain commodity or skill set. So I will do this for you if you do this for me. Prior to money coming in, people used to create forms of usury even before money was present. For example, if we both had the same commodity and you needed it now and I could do without it, and therefore I would say you can give it back to me that same amount later, usury used to occur when I would charge an increase on the same commodity before money. So you would say, whatever, I need a kilo of barley. I have so many kilos of barley, so I will give it to you. But when you are able to harvest yours, I want 1.2 kilos of barley back. So this was how interest started even prior to money being created. Maybe you know when money was created. Money was created because governments needed to pay their soldiers. So they started to create coins, tax people, and demand the tax in coins so that they could pay their soldiers. That's how money started going into creation. So have a look at page 212. And what you'll see is that from the very outset, Islam even recognized that usury interest, taking advantage on a loan, even if it's non-financial, non-money based, but commodity against commodity, was prohibited. So, second paragraph, or rather first paragraph, another aspect of this, I'm reading from the book, another aspect of this, for example, the sale of 20 kilograms of rice to be delivered immediately in exchange for 25 kilograms of the same quality of rice would be considered as haram. It would be considered as usury. So it's not just money. Even if your business is exchanging the same item for item, if you seek an extra amount on it, it would be considered to be usury. Next paragraph. The prohibition to charge extra on transactions applies only when two essential aspects are met. That the commodities to be exchanged are identical, wheat for wheat, sugar for sugar, marble for marble. Or B, that the price is determined by their size, volume or weight. So now I want this item in this many kilograms versus this many kilograms back is how much I want. Now what's interesting is, if however there are slight differences in the quality of what you are seeking back, then it is permissible for you to seek an increase. As you'll read further down, it is permissible for an additional charge to be made on the transaction, for example, 100 medium-sized oranges in exchange for 80 large-sized oranges. However, an exchange of 200 gallons of oil for 250 gallons of oil for the same specification is unlawful. So we can see here how Islam began to build into its understanding the issues of usury and how it might be permitted to take an increase versus when it's not permitted to take an increase. Now, having understood this, we move away from the Quranic definition to the Fiqhi definition. And this brings us to the seventh principle of principles in our Islamic law series. So far we've mentioned 6, and now we come to our 7th Islamic principle. Anything in which you insist there is a benefit in a loan constitutes riba. This is from the hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So you can see here the slight nuance between the Quranic definition and a Fiqhi definition. Quranic definition focused around the issue of disempowerment and disadvantage. Fiqh was much more narrow. It said, whenever you insist, demand, or even seek a benefit on a loan, this is representative of riba. This constitutes riba. You can see how the fiqhi definition is much more narrow, much more specific. So for example, I lend you £1,000 and I say, give me the same £1,000 back, but I want you to cut my lawn as well. As an example. Is it interest or not? Yes or no? Yes? Yes. Because I am demanding, I'm seeking a benefit. Any benefit at all that is linked to the loan, in addition to the amount that has been loaned, is considered to be riba in Islam. So I can't ask for anything back. Even though I'm not actually really disadvantaging you necessarily. Can you see the Quranic understanding was about exploitation, disadvantaging someone, embedding a system of corruption and exploitation. From the fiqhi definition, it's not. Even if there is no evident disempowerment of you, You're coming over to my house for chai anyway. Whilst you're there, this is the favor I want you to do. Most people would say, no problem, I'll do you the favor because you've lent me the £100, £1,000. From an Islamic perspective, even that demand is haram and it would make the loan batil. Now what's very interesting is that although I am not allowed to be able to request or demand or seek anything from you, you can offer something in advance, in addition to me. Turn to your books, the printouts that I've sent, or the screenshots that I've sent. Page 258. It should be the next one in the sequence that I sent you, inshallah. Is that correct? Page 258? Read point B with me. A borrower may promise the lender a favor of gratitude so long as that this is not a stipulation, a condition to the loan. So I can lend you the £1,000. You can say, thank you, I'll give you the £1,000 and I'll mow your lawn for you. As an example, or whatever. Yeah? Whatever you want to offer in thanks, in gratitude, you can do. But the moment I suggest it or I ask it, it makes it batil. A borrower may promise the lender a favor of gratitude without this being stipulated as a condition. Many imami jurists register no objection to this being done, such opinion being based on the authentic ahadith attributed to Imam as-Sadiq salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, who said, when you lend a specific number of dirhams and on repaying the loan the borrower expresses gratitude by returning dirhams of a higher purity, meaning more valuable, it is lawful to accept them, providing no such condition was stipulated at the time that the loan was agreed. Imami jurists also cite the hadith that records that on the occasions that the Prophet ﷺ needed to borrow 2-year-old camels in order to hospitably receive an unexpectedly large number of visitors, he returned to the lenders more valuable 4-year-old camels in their stead. So obviously the older the camel, the larger they were, the more powerful legs they had, the longer they could continue to walk. A 4-year-old camel was better than a 2-year-old camel. So what you can see here, that it was the practice of the Prophet that if someone lent him something, he actually gave something back better than it. So fiqhi, you can permit it to do it. Akhlaqi, morals, it seems here that this is a sunnah. Now this is normal. Someone lends you something. At the end of it, you say thank you. You might take them out for dinner. You might get them a small gift, whatever it might be. It's permissible for you to be able to do that. Now, this is why some of our maraji', when it comes to the issue of, let's say, opening a bank account or taking a mortgage, some of them allow it because taking the interest in the bank account, you can't demand it. You can't go to the bank and go, I want 5% interest. Well, we're in no position to do that here anyway. But you know that they offer a number of different, let's call them products, right? One will be at 1% interest rate, one will be at 3% interest rate. Someone will say, can I choose the higher interest rate? Yes, so long as you haven't demanded it, because they've offered it to you. Or similarly, some scholars will say when it comes to taking a mortgage, it's not you that's demanded that that's the deal. You are having to pay that back. They have done the haram act. There are other scholars that will say no, that's not permissible. And the reason for that is that there's a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It says that Allah curses, I think, either 4 or 5 people when it comes to riba. The one who seeks it, the one who takes it, the 2 that write it down, and the one who witnesses it. That's 5. So in the deal, I could demand it, but you could accept it. And then, of course, there's people to scribe the contract, and then there's someone to witness the contract. Sometimes you'll get an outside party to say, I witnessed this. All 5 people are cursed, according to the hadith. So some maraji' say this hadith shows that we can't even take the mortgage when it is with interest. And as you know, there are Islamic mortgages or solutions that they provide to you in order to be able to deal with that. So this is another topic in and of itself, but it comes to the topic of usury. So this gives you some background on the issue of usury as a principle and how we understand what is not permitted and what is permitted principally. Then we come to the issue of loans generally. If we return back to the verses of the Quran, if you could kindly open the verses of Quran that I've mentioned to you. Surah Al-Baqarah verses 276, Surah Al-Baqarah verse 245. What is the solution? A person loans £100, £1,000, £10,000. As you know, here in the West, it is normal that we will see interest being charged. What is the Islamic term for the way in which Islam encourages loans to take place? Say again? Qardul Hasana. How do we translate Qardul Hasana? A goodly loan. There are 2 types of loans that are mentioned in the Quran that we are encouraged to do. Obviously, we assume now that riba is haram. What are the 2 types of loans? One, a loan that is given to someone and then the lender forgives the loan. That's called Qard al-Hasana, where you give it and for whatever reason, if the person cannot pay it back, you say to them, no problem. You write off the loan. In our language, you write off the loan. That's called Qard al-Hasana. So you either give it as a gift and at the beginning it's known, I'm just giving this to you because you need it, brother. Or I'm giving it to you as a loan, but if you can't pay it back, it's okay. Or later on the person comes and says, I'm struggling, I can only give 50%. No problem, give me the 50%. I forgive the remaining 50%. That's the first type of Qard al-Hasana. The second type of Qard al-Hasana is where if you can only pay the 50%, I delay the remaining 50% until you're able to pay it back. These are the 2 types that are mentioned within the Quran. Now I want to show you the difference. Allah talks about the difference between you giving sadaqah and you giving Qard al-Hasana in the Quran. Which one do you think is better? Giving sadaqah or giving Qard al-Hasana? Qard al-Hasana. Shall I show you the difference, how Allah describes it? Open the first verse, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 276. Everybody's there? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Yamhaqullahu ar-riba wa yurbis sadaqat. Allah destroys interest. But what does He do? He increases charity. So if you give charity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He will increase you. Fine. Nobody doubts that. Everybody knows that if you give charity, Allah will give you manifold back. Have a look at the next verse, verse 245. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 245. Everybody's there? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. من ذا الذي يقرض الله قرضا حسنا فيضاعفه له أضعافا كثيرا. Whoever will lend to Allah a goodly loan, and we just described what is a Qard al-Hasana, either you write off part of it or you delay the request for part of it back. Whoever does this, Allah will multiply it many times over. Subhanallah. In the previous verse, Allah just said, look, it's good. You do sadaqat, alhamdulillah, Allah will increase you. In Qard al-Hasana, Allah goes a step further. He doesn't say, I'll increase you. أَضْعَافًا كَثِيرًا. I'm going to give you more and more and more. So the first solution to riba from the Islamic perspective is Qardul Hasana. And we're encouraged here to be able to invest in people, to be able to give to people in the formats of Qardul Hasana. Our Islamic institutions should have these available to us. There are some 18 different charitable avenues in the Quran. Our communities, may Allah bless them for the great charitable works that they do, tend to only know of a few. They tend to focus on helping orphans and widows. They tend to help to build schools, and all these things are very, very important. But there are 18 avenues of charity in the Quran, and actually I will argue that some of them our Shia community doesn't even know of. They haven't even heard of. And I know this because last Shahr Ramadan I did a series on it in Manchester and asked the audience, which of these 18 do you know? And half of them didn't even know half of the 18 avenues. Qardul Hasana is one of the 18 avenues that we are encouraged to give charity, which is either to write off part of a loan or to delay the acceptance, the reacceptance of the loan. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Okay. So, let us go to another aspect of loans. Let us say I lend you £1,000 and you are unable to pay it back. My first choice is Qardul Hasana, but let's say I don't want to do that. It's not within me to do it. And I demand that you pay me back. You can't pay. Is it permissible for me to demand your bankruptcy in Islam? Is there such a thing as bankruptcy in Islam? What do you think?
As long as it's not a necessity.
So you already know where we're going with this. Excellent. So bankruptcy is allowed, but it's with conditions, as Sister said. In this country, in most countries around the world, if someone falls foul of becoming bankrupt, everything can be taken that is not of limited liability. Right? If you set up a business which is limited liability, that off the books is not for you to take. Right? But anything that is available to be taken, home can be taken, car can be taken, anything of your possessions can be taken. Correct? Right now there's a case, a quite famous case, Boris Becker. Have you seen Boris Becker? Boris Becker owed whatever amount, and apparently he's being accused that he didn't declare all of his assets, shall we say. Right? And maybe he held back some of his assets so that he could keep them and not have to sell them. That's a very interesting thing. So now he's been taken to court for having not declared all of his assets. From an Islamic perspective, of course, you have to declare everything. But some things, as you said, are untouchable. Now this is important because sometimes we tend to deal with things amongst ourselves, or we're looking for an Islamic understanding of these laws. So it's very beautiful. I'll read to you a hadith that comes from the companion Jabir ibn Abdullah Ansari. He states, Mu'adh bin Jabal was amongst the most generous of companions of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his eagerness to assist the development of the ummah, he built up a large debt. He used to borrow and then give to people, but was unable to pay back. So he was actually doing borrowings, not for himself, but for the ummah. Nevertheless, he borrowed the money from people. The hadith continues. When his creditors started to push him to pay, he hid away in his house for several days. The creditors eventually sought the Prophet's intervention, and so the Prophet sent for both parties. The creditors pleaded, Ya Rasulullah, please claim our dues from Mu'adh ibn Jabal. The Prophet responded, Allah will shower His mercy on the person who writes off Mu'adh's debt. What we just called Qardul Hasana. Consequently, some of the creditors wrote off their debts, whilst others refused, insisting that the Prophet claim their rights from him. The Prophet turned to Mu'adh and said, O Mu'adh, be patient, settle your remaining debts, even if it means you have to lose all your wealth, which in our terms would be bankruptcy. The Prophet then took away all of Mu'adh's wealth and handed it over to the creditors. After its distribution, it still only reached 5/7 of whatever Mu'adh owed. The creditors turned again to the Prophet, demanding that Mu'adh sell himself into slavery to pay off the remaining debts. Which is actually what they used to do at the time of the Prophet when he dealt with riba. They put you into 1,000% APR. When you couldn't pay, you sold off everything. You sold your family members and eventually yourself into slavery. So the creditors demanded that the Prophet did this to Mu'adh. The Prophet refused, stating, leave him alone now. You cannot lodge any further claim. Now, based upon this, in Shi'i jurisprudence, there is a hadith from our sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, that state there are certain things that a person cannot demand be sold to you, be given to you to repay a debt. You cannot use these in bankruptcy. They are protected and the debtor keeps them. His house, his daily food, his basic clothes, and his books of knowledge. I'll repeat those. His house is off limits, his daily food is off limits, clothes are off limits, and books of knowledge are off limits. Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam stated, do not remove a person from his house in order to pay off a debt. Now that's very interesting. Which principle of the 7 principles that we've gone through in our series would a person go back to prove that you cannot take from them someone's house? Yeah, you're right. He is an authority, but if he's lost, if he has to pay off a debt, then he's no longer musallituna ala amwalihi. He's no longer in authority over his own wealth. That by definition is what happens when you become bankrupt. A trustee comes in and becomes an authority over your wealth. So it's not that one. Causing harm. La dharar wa la dirar. Islam does not occasion harm. It does not allow you to put yourself into harm. So now if I lose my house and I become homeless, that is an unbearable harm that has come to you according to an Islamic perspective. I also mentioned last week that there are 5 maqasid al-sharia, things that the deen has to protect. It has to protect your deen, has to protect your aql, has to protect your wealth, has to protect your family. Look at what the ruling is in Shia Islam. You cannot lose your house, your food, your clothes, or your books of knowledge. Why can't you lose your books of knowledge? Because deen is more important than wealth. If you need to have recourse to your risala amaliyah to know how to be able to observe Allah's laws, that is more important than paying off the debt. So for those of us with bigger libraries, alhamdulillah, we get to keep them, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now we finish with the third point. First point was usury. Second point was loans and how loans are structured in order to deal with usury. Islamic loans are based on qardul hasana. The third one is in the last parts of the printouts or the screenshots that I sent to you. So it should be page 260, if I am correct. Is that right? Okay, actually, in page 260 onwards, there are some rulings that are interesting when it comes to loans. So you can read these in your own time. Points 8, 9, 10. I'll just read them very quickly. When a debtor dies, point number 8. When a debtor dies, repayment of their debts becomes immediately due. So obviously you have to put this into your will if you are in debt. Number 9. If repayment of a loan falls due at a time when the debtor is temporarily challenged by cash flow problems, the debtor must either sell property or goods they own. So you can sell your own house to be able to pay off the debts. Why? Why can't I force you to sell your house, and as in through bankruptcy, but why can you sell your own house? Because simply you can downsize. Let's say the house is worth 300,000. You owe 100,000. Bankruptcy in the Western sense would be that I take over the house as a trustee of that amount and I can sell the house. Whereas in the Islamic perspective, it's not permitted to do that. But you can choose to sell your own house, downsize to a £200,000 house, and pay off your debts of £100,000. That's in point number 9. And point number 10, in times in which goods or other property are no longer no longer able to be sold for what was previously thought to be a reasonable price, is a debtor obliged to accept lower prices? So for example, you've borrowed a commodity and all of a sudden there's a price crash. You've borrowed it at 1,000, it's now only worth 100. Can you sell it for 100? From the Islamic perspective, this puts you into dharar, puts you into such loss and such harm that you don't have to settle your debts that way, because you will lose out. It's not fair on you. So carry on reading. In times, number 10, in times in which goods or other properties are no longer able to be sold for what was previously thought to be a reasonable price, is a debtor obliged to accept these lower prices? Or is it appropriate for them to attempt to avoid loss by negotiating an extended period to pay the creditor? In answering, we need to differentiate between dharar al-akbar, great loss, that have the potential to cause unbearable hardship, and a smaller amount of loss. If it is a smaller amount of loss, it would be permissible for you. If it is a great loss, it would not be permissible for you. Or at least, it would not be permissible for the creditor to demand it from you. Last thing I want to mention is the second way of dealing with usury. The first one was qard al-hasana, and then the last one is profit sharing, called mudaraba in Islamic law. Very briefly, mudaraba is quite simple. It means profit sharing. What happens at the moment is, if I go to the bank and I want to be able to invest in my business, create a business, I will say I want a loan of £100,000. They will put a charge of interest on it. So I'll end up paying 120,000, 130,000 back. As we know, it's haram from the Islamic perspective. Solution 1 was qardul hasana. Solution number 2 is called mudaraba. Mudaraba is simple. Profit sharing. You bring expertise, I bring the cash. So instead of me giving you the cash and then charging you interest on it, if I don't want to do qard al-hasana, then we should become business partners. Very simple. And Islam encourages this as the solution. So each person brings to the table a certain amount of skill or quality or experience, and we should become business partners. Now what's very interesting is Islam has a number of rulings when it comes to this sort of business partnership. To discourage, to prohibit riba, and if a person doesn't want to do qard al-hasana, they can do mudaraba. Ruling number 1. If, this is a hadith from Imam Ali alayhi salam, you must settle, the debtor must settle their debts prior to seeking an investment in their new business. Now it's not wajib for you to do that, it's mustahab for you to do that. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, if a creditor tells someone who owes them money, but who is not at that moment able to settle their debt, to change the nature of their loan to a mudaraba contract, may this be done? Imam Ali alayhi salam responded by saying, such a suggestion is not appropriate unless the debtor has already settled their debts. And then in the book of Ayatollah Milani, he has a number of very useful rulings that allows us to be able to deal with business partnerships. One hadith from the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam on business partnerships is very interesting. The Prophet used to have a business partner that he used to work with in Mecca when he used to work for Lady Khadija alayhi salam. So this partner would do relay with the Prophet for 6 months. The Prophet would go out for 6 months with the inventory and then come back. The other partner would go out for 6 months and come back. They both worked for Lady Khadija alayhi salam as equal partners in that business. The hadith says that the Prophet, when he went out for his 6-month journey and he came back, the first thing he did with his business partner was show him how much profit he had made. When his business partner went for the 6 months and came back, the Prophet never asked him how much profit did we make. He would only ask him about how his health was, his safety was on his journey. Just beautiful business ethics. Why? Because of course, if I have your inventory and you don't know what's happening with it, when I come back, you'll be interested to know in the inventory. So I should be concerned with your concern. And immediately I should do up the tallies with you. This is what we sold, this is how much we made, this is how much we lost. Whereas if you go out and come back, I shouldn't be concerned with how much you made. I should be concerned with whether you were safe on your journey, how your health was on your journey, how your family was in your absence. This is the business ethics in Islam from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam. So tonight we have covered 3 things. We've spoken about usury and some of the rules regarding usury, what you can and cannot do. We've spoken about the solutions to usury from the Islamic perspective, which is qaradul hasana, and what happens if a person becomes bankrupt. And then thirdly, the issue of mudaraba, which is a profit-sharing cause. And for the sake of brevity, I won't go into the rulings of mudaraba at length, but if anyone needs it, it's available from Ayatollah Milani's book. As I said, this is our last discussion in our series prior to Shahr Ramadan. There will be one more after, inshallah, on khums. But so far the idea has been to show you how detailed Islamic rulings are and where you can find these rulings, how they affect our daily life. I hope inshallah it has been a useful series for you thus far and given you something to be able to reflect on and apply into your own daily lives. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salli ya Rabbi ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. If there are any questions, I will happily take them. If there's any comments, queries, recommendations.
Small amount of profit sharing because the money that you put in the bank or
So just before, can I clarify? So we're talking about the specific product of banking. Is that right? Not credit cards. Because based on the example that you've given, if we were to go with the spirit and not the letter of the law, credit cards, I would say, would be definitely in the loan sharking side. Because most people end up chasing their tails. Most people only need that credit card. Some people do it because they get something back, yeah? So they'll get points, which they can use on air miles or whatever it is. But that's how they rope you in. They're making so much profit from you that they can afford to give you all of these different benefits. But even without benefits, or when benefits started to come as a practice of these businesses, most people were having to use credit cards because they could not afford their daily or their monthly, whatever. They go to the shop and they'd have to use a credit card. And it always puts them into cyclical debts. So I might concede theoretically that the banking products could work from the perspective of, because it's such minimal amounts that are being worked on. But credit cards and business loans, it tends not to be profit sharing because they're making far, far more than you are. The share of the profit is not in our favor at all.
So you can't take a loan to start a business.
No, you can. Remember, we said that you're not demanding, they're demanding on you the interest.
So in that case, it's
But then, as I said, some stricter mujtahideen use this hadith of 5 people are cursed. The one who takes interest. The stricter mujtahideen will say, even if you didn't demand it, by you participating in it, it is you're participating in that system that shaitan sets up to create. Now, it may not be you personally that becomes faqir from it, but 7 out of 10 people in the land will. They will be embedded into cyclical debt. So the stricter mujtahideen take this hadith. Not all do.
one final observation is that the £1,000 that you give today is not the same £1,000 for next year because it's inflation.
Yeah.
So within that.
So which principle would you go back to here to be able to square off that issue? No harm. So if there's such inflation rates, that means that when you pay back that money, you would be in loss. Some might argue that it would be permissible for you, but then it wouldn't be interest that would be charged. It would be the amount that allows you to match inflation rate. So it wouldn't be interest. It would be an inflation match. And we all know that, what's the inflation rate at the moment? Was it 8%, 6.3, 8%? Something like that, right? So then if you lent 1,000, you'd have to match inflation and not anything above it. Otherwise it would be considered riba.
If you lent someone some money and then they said to you they were struggling to pay it back, so you said it's fine, and then later you fall into hard times, could you
Later on, sorry?
Like later on you fall into hard times, could you recall that debt and say, well at the time it was fine, but now I'd want it back, or would that be that you can't do?
If you've written off the debt, then you've written it off. If you've delayed it and said, don't worry, just give it back to me when you can, or I'm okay for the moment, you hold on to it until I need it, then you can come back to them and reclaim it.
Are we allowed buy-to-let mortgages?
We are. Yeah. Again, so what we have is our mujtahideen have created ways for us in our niyyah for us to take out the mortgage in a halal way, even though we are being forced contractually to do it their way. Yeah? So I haven't gone into Islamic mortgages because that probably requires its own session, but we can take it out, but the majority of the maraji will say you have to have a particular niyyah as to how you're dealing with it. So have a look on their websites, or have a look in the book, or I can let you know, inshallah. Shall we? Are you going to announce the other programs, or? صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد.
Just to let you know of some upcoming programs. Sorry, just to announce some upcoming programs. So this Saturday, we've got a program here at the center. It's at 7:30, and it's a youth-based program from 11 to 30. It's a big, but from 11 to 30, you can come here, and it's basically welcoming Ramzan, and you can ask any questions that you have, and the Sheikh will attempt to answer those questions. So it's for 11 to 30. There'll be Maghribain namaz, and then thereafter there'll be iftar. Iftar will be rice and kubude kebabs, 12 pounds.
The idea is to encourage the youth to fast on the last day of Sha'ban. Now I know you've been fasting since 1st of Rajab, but the idea is to encourage the youth to fast on the last day of Sha'ban and see in Shahr Ramadan in a state of fasting.
But if they want to come and join in at the food time, then
At food time, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to come for the food time, yeah, of course.
because the namaz, there'll be namaz first.
The attendance is for the
Yeah, and then but that's the first part. But that's the first part of the program, and then after Maghribain there'll be iftar, so you can come in for Maghribain namaz, and if you bring your 12 pounds, you can join in with the kebab and rice as well, and after that there's a communal program for everyone where will be sorry, it's a paid iftar, yes, where you can. Where there'll be recitation of the fourth Imam's dua welcoming Ramadan and Joshua Kabi, which is recommended on the eve of 1st of Ramadan. So that's a communal program. So yes, you can join at namaz, and then there is. So if anyone wants to come for that program, if you could let us know, then we can appropriately order the food, because the food needs to be ordered in. So if those who are coming can let us know in advance, and that would be appreciated. There's another program which is going to be held in Birmingham. Sheikh will be traveling to Birmingham, and it's let me just get up. So it's an organization called Time for Change. They're a Birmingham-based, Brummie-based organization. And Sheikh will be giving a lecture together with Sheikh Arif. Sheikh's theme will be Build Your Relationship with the Quran, 3 Easy Principles. And Sheikh Arif's theme will be The Art of Surrendering to Allah. So that's tomorrow. It's in Birmingham. It's at the Al-Mahdi Center. It's at 7:52. So if you want to go, and if there's any car sharing, then you can go there and join in that program if you want. And then from Monday, we're starting our daily program, Ramadan program. The program initially will start at 7:30 with Quran Circle, Quran Darsa, followed by Maghribain Namaz. And then there'll be iftar, and then there'll be dua iftitah and a lecture thereafter. So that starts from Monday to Friday. There'll be iftar being served at the center. On the weekends, there's no iftar. There's also the competition. Those of you who haven't signed up to it, I suggest you do so. It's the competition where the youths again can sell whatever they want with a budget of £30. Adults can also take part in it, although they won't be part of the competition. But if there is anything that they have and they want to sell, then bring it along. Basically 10% will go to in the name of the 12th Imam, and 10% will be the store rent of the Prophet as well. So 10% of your profits will go to the 12th Imam, and 10% of your profits will go for the store rent, and the remaining 80% will go as a donation to the Jamaat. So those are some of the programs. We'll circulate the program within next day or so for Ramzan, and then there's various other programs. There's Quran competition, and the theme which Sheikh will then go into. Thank you. Salawat.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I just want to mention what is our series for Shahr Ramadan. So as you heard, we will start from Monday night. The series that I want to be able to discuss with you is how to be able to pick any subject you want to study in the Quran and how to be able to study it. So imagine you say, I'm interested in finding out what the Quran says about anything. Shafa'a in the Quran, ghafla in the Quran, taqwa in the Quran. How do I go about actually searching the Quran for the subject matter that interests me? So this is what is known as tadabbur mawdu'i, to be able to gather a subject, a topic, and search it in the Quran. So our series will systematically take you through, very slowly, the technique of how to be able to pick any subject you're interested in and gather those verses together and study those verses for yourself. So that will be our series, inshallah, from Monday night, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Thank you, everyone. Safe journey home, inshallah. We've done our ziyarat warith, right? So, normal ziyarah. Please stand for ziyarah, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim.